So before I start, this story arc was created with love and passion. I want to quickly explain why I wrote this arc. I created this epilogue to give closure to a lot of players who connected more deeply with Alexios and always saw him as the true hero of Odyssey. It explores how his journey quietly ends, while showing how Kassandra's path continues, honouring and respecting both characters and uniting their stories, giving a bigger perspective to the end of Odyssey. Something which Ubisoft should have done, but I hope this helps those like myself who connected more with Alexios. Without further ado, I give you Assassin's Creed, the last horizon of an Odyssey. The third year of silence. The world had not stopped turning. The sun still rose and fell, and the sea still breathed its endless hymn. The sea had not changed, though Alexios had. It had been 3 years that had passed since Alexios had walked from the gates of Atlantis, the Staff of Hermes burning faintly in his palm, its light no warmer than the sun that refused to age him. The world moved forward, and he stood still, untouched by time, yet corroded by memory. 3 years since the gods had made him eternal, and in doing so, unmade the man he once was. He had wandered far beyond the islands of Greece, beyond lands even the philosophers dared to name. He'd seen mountains carved by fire, oceans frozen in their sleep, stars that never moved. But the more of the world he saw, the more hollow it became. Every step forward felt like walking through an echo of a memory that refused to fade. There were moments, fleeting, fragile, when he almost felt alive again. The laughter of sailors at a harbour, the scent of rain on sun-baked stone, the soft cry of a child being born beneath a pink sky. But each time, when he reached for the warmth of it, it turned to dust. Immortality had made him the last witness of a play with no audience left. Now he stood where it all began, on the cliffs of Sparta, where his family now reside, where the wind still sang through the olive groves, and the sea shimmered like molten bronze. The sun hung low, spilling its dying fire across the waves. He no longer feared the dark, he feared the light that never truly reached him. His red cloak whipped at his legs, frayed and salt-stained, his armour, once gleaming, now dull to the colour of old iron. In his right hand, the Staff of Hermes Trismegistus glowed faintly, its serpents coiled and restless, as though even they longed for sleep. He raised it toward the horizon, its serpents catching the sun, the twin wings glinting like memory. The artifact thrummed with divine energy, whispering in the voice of ages. He could hear it in his bones, the hum of eternity, the unending cycle of life and death, and he hated it. Alexios, softly, 3 years and not a breath of peace. A familiar voice drifted from behind him. The olive trees knew her steps before he did. Their leaves whispered her name as she walked the path, slow, deliberate, every sound carved into the wind. Myrin would speak. You speak as though the world owes you rest. You also live like a ghost, my son. He turned. She stood among the olive trees, her red dress fading at the edges, yet her eyes remained fierce and alive. She looked upon him not as a hero or a god, but as her boy, the one who once chased seagulls along the shore of Sparta. Alexios would reply to his mother. Perhaps it does, mother. Or perhaps I owe it more than I've given. A ghost, you say? Perhaps I am one. Myrin, you've given it everything. But this, and she gestures to the staff, this isn't life. It's imprisonment dressed as purpose. And what does your hauntings bring you? He said nothing at that moment. He paused, listening to the sound of waves dragging across rock. The staff pulsed softly, and she flinched at the sound, as though it were breathing. Alexios would reply, "Nothing. That's the curse of it. There's nothing left to take, and still I remain." She moved closer, her red dress rustling in the wind. The smell of olives and salt hung between them. Myrin would say softly, "You were born of flesh, Alexios, not prophecy. You cannot live forever without losing what made you human. Let it go, Alexios, before it hollows you." He finally turned to her. The light caught his face, weathered but unaged. His eyes reflected the sea. Alexios would sharply say, "And what am I if not human, mother?" Myrin would place her hands onto her son's face, using her 2 thumbs to wipe the slow trickle of tears that began to fall from his eyes. "You are my son. You are a man. That is enough for me, Alexios." He wanted to believe her. Gods, he wanted to, but the staff hummed faintly beside him, its golden light crawling up his arm, reminding him of what he'd become. He closed his eyes and listened at the sea smashing against the rocks below, inhaling deeply, then exhaled and opening his eyes. The fires of memory. That night, Sparta slept under an amber moon. The streets lay silent except for the soft rhythm of cicadas and the rustle of olive leaves turning in the wind. Far beyond the walls, torches burned in the distant barracks, flickering like dying stars over the hills. Alexios sat by the hearth of his family's old villa. The years had dulled the marble, and ivy had crept through the cracks in the stone, curling like old veins over memory itself. The fire was small but alive, breathing warmth into a home that had known both love and blood. He stared into it as if it might speak. Each spark rose and vanished before it reached the chimney, just as every name he remembered rose in his mind and disappeared again before he could hold it. The Staff of Hermes leaned against the wall nearby, its glow weaving through the shadows. When the light touched his armour, it shimmered like an old scar that refused to close. He poured a cup of wine and let it sit untouched beside him. The scent alone was enough to remind him of nights when life had weight, when laughter filled this place, when friends shared bread and stories under the same roof. A sound stirred behind him. Myrin stood at the archway, her hands clasped, watching her son in silence. Myrin would speak. "Do you still dream, my son?" He did not turn. He only watched the fire breathe and fade. Alexios would reply, "No, the staff does not let me, mother." She stepped closer, her sandals brushing the stone. "Myrin, then it is not a gift. It is a chain with a prettier name." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried more pain than peace. Alexios would begin to speak. "I used to dream of her sometimes, Kassandra, of Phoebe, of the ship, and Nima, and our child, Elpidios. They were small dreams, quiet ones. The sea, the wind, laughter. But they stopped. It just feels as though the staff took that from me too." She sat across from him, her eyes tracing the shadows moving across his face. The lines of time refused to mark him. He was caught in an eternal dusk, his youth preserved, his soul eroded. Myrin would reply to him with, "Then it is killing you, Alexios." Slowly, like a god punishing a man for daring to be mortal. He turned toward her. For the first time in months, his eyes softened. Alexios speaks. "I thought I could bear it. I thought if I lived long enough, I would understand why the gods made me this way. But there is nothing to understand. There is only loss stretched thin over eternity." The words cracked slightly as they left him. He closed his hands into fists, knuckles white against the glow of the fire. Myrin would softly say, "Then end it, my son, if this burden is too much to carry." She would pause, looking at Alexios, placing her hand on his. The words came calm, but they hit him like thunder. He looked at her, startled. Myrin again, in a soft tone. End it, Alexios, before it ends you. You have been a soldier, a son, a brother, a father, a mystios. You fought for the people. You have fought gods and men alike. There is nothing left to prove. Let it go before it turns you into the very thing it promised to protect you from. He wanted to answer, but the truth held his tongue still. The silence between them filled with the crackle of wood and the faint whisper of the staff's hum. He rose slowly and walked toward it. His hand hovered above the golden staff, trembling. The artifact vibrated beneath the air, alive in its own right. The closer he came, the louder it spoke within him. Not words, but sensations. Hunger, power, immortality. He closed his eyes. The whisper of the staff met the sound of the waves beyond the villa, and for a moment he thought he could hear the world itself breathing. Alexios turns to his mother. I have lived long enough to see my name fade into stories, and stories fade into silence. If I let it go, I fade with them. I can finally find the peace I long for. Myrin would feel a tear run down her cheek. Then fade, my son. But fade as a man, not as a god. Her voice trembled, yet it held the strength of every Spartan mother before her. He turned to her, the firelight drawing gold lines across his face. His eyes glimmered, two small oceans reflecting the flame. Alexios responds, I have not feared death since I was a boy. Myrin smiles. It is not death that asks courage of you now. It is life. She stood, crossed the space between them, and took his hands. They were warm, too warm for a mortal man. Myrin would look into the eyes of Alexios. Whatever you decide, you will not face it alone. You never have, my son. I love you, Alexios. He nodded, though his gaze drifted past her, toward the open doorway where the horizon waited, black and endless. He stood up and placed his hand onto his mother's shoulder with the staff in his right hand, then walked towards the doorway into darkness. He knew his mother was right. He had carried the world long enough. The loss of loved ones, his friends along the way. The toll was heavy, like if the statue of Zeus itself was standing on his chest. The weight of blood. The days that followed moved like heavy dreams. Alexios wandered through the olive groves at dawn, the dew cold beneath his feet, the smell of salt thick in the morning air. He could feel the earth breathing around him, alive, changing, mortal. The staff hummed at his back, its presence constant, as though it sensed what he was beginning to decide. He visited the grave of Nikolaos. He passed away a year prior. He placed a sculpture of an eagle atop of it. The carving was the one that Phoebe had given to Alexios. It was the one thing in the world that gave him comfort. He then spoke to the wind instead of the stone. He walked the Spartan roads and watched children sparring in the dust where he had once trained. Each sight carved deeper into him the truth that he no longer belonged here. By the third evening, he stood on the same cliff where he and his mother had spoken, watching the sunset collapse into the Aegean. He could almost hear the laughter of his crew echoing over the wind. He felt them all with him. Phoebe, Barnabas, Herodotus, ghosts of a life that still had meaning even without eternity. And then from far down the valley, the sound of hooves rose against the hum of cicadas. He turned. A lone rider approached, the glint of armour catching the last threads of daylight. Kassandra. Her armour was dulled by travel, her cloak torn by wind and years. Yet her presence was unchanged, the same storm of power and pain that had once torn the world apart. For a long moment she said nothing. Her eyes searched him, perhaps afraid of what she might find, a shadow, a god, a stranger. Kassandra would speak. "Malaka, I wondered if you were real." Alexios smiled faintly. "I was beginning to wonder that myself," he said, looking up at her. They stood close enough for him to see the small scars across her jaw. New ones, earned ones. Time had touched her, and it suited her. Kassandra would say in passive-aggressive tone, "You have been gone 3 years, not a word." Alexios would roll his eyes. "I needed to see if the world still needed me." It did not. She exhaled through her nose, half laugh, half sigh. Kassandra, whilst punching him in the shoulder. "And now?" Alexios would again roll his eyes, but smile slightly. "Now, I think it needs you." He reached to the staff. Its serpents glowed softly, and for a moment it felt alive between them. Kassandra, taken back. "You would give that to me, after what it has done to you?" Alexios replies, "Because of what it has done to me, because I do not want to live forever if it means forgetting how to live." Her jaw tightened. The wind moved around them, carrying the smell of cypress and sea. Kassandra, still in awe. "I do not deserve this, Alexios." "No one does, Kassandra, but you can make it mean something." Kassandra fights to hold back the tears. "And when I take it," Alexios softly says, "and then I rest." Her eyes shone. For the first time in years, tears fell down her face. Behind them, Mirin appeared on the path, watching in silence. The world had grown still, as though the gods themselves waited to see what would happen next. He placed his hand over hers. He turned to his mother and nodded with a smile, then continued smiling, looking at Kassandra. Alexios closed his eyes. The staff thrummed with divine power, golden lines spiralling up their arms like threads of sunlight. Alexios would squeeze Kassandra's hand before the hum and vibration of the staff would begin to transfer its power. "Live for me, sister. Give your life meaning and find peace. I love you both." "Mother," he would say, whilst looking in her direction. "Kassandra," he'd say, looking back at her. "You Malaka," he'd smile. Alexios would smile wider and would begin to feel himself fade from this world. The light burst outward. The wind rose, carrying golden dust and leaves into the air. When the glow faded, the cliff was silent. Only Mirin and Kassandra remained, her hand trembling around the staff, her breath heavy with grief and heartache. She turned toward her mother, tears running down both their faces. "Kassandra," her voice trembling, "he's gone." Mirin would gently reply, "No, my child, he is free." The dawn over Sparta. When morning came, Sparta was quiet. The horizon was a river of gold spilling across the hills. Kassandra stood beneath the olive trees, where she and Alexios once stood, the staff warm in her grasp. Its light had softened. No longer divine, only alive. Her mother joined her, silent. Together they looked toward the sea. Mirin softly spoke. "He found peace at last, my child." Kassandra would pause for a moment. "And I will keep it for him." The first sunlight touched the tip of the staff and spread down its length until it glowed like a living heart. The sound of the Aegean reached them from below, steady and endless. And for the first time, The light that touched them felt real. And in the golden heart of Sparta, where gods and men had once met as equals, the last echo of Alexios faded into the wind, not as a curse, but as peace. The echo of the horizon. Centuries passed like the slow sprout of a flower. Empires rose and fell, their banners forgotten to the dust. Cities changed names, gods lost their temples, and the olive groves of Sparta turned to ruins where wildflowers now bloomed. Yet one woman still walked those paths. Kassandra remained unchanged, her eyes still carrying the same deep shimmer of the sea that had taken her brother. Her form was simple, wrapped in the quiet grace of a wanderer who had long outlived legend. Around her neck hung a small pendant of hammered bronze, a relic from an age when mortals still spoke to gods, and the gods still listened. The world had quieted. She had wandered through it all, through wars that meant nothing, through ages of peace that lasted only moments. She had seen the stars shift in their patterns, and the sea claim the shores of empires. But always she returned here, to Sparta, to the cliffs where the wind still sang his name. The land was quiet now. The ruins of her mother's villa lay half buried in earth and memory. The hearthstone where Alexios had once sat was cracked, but still warm under the sun. She knelt before it, brushing away the dust with her fingers. The Staff of Hermes rested beside her, its glow long since dimmed to the colour of dying embers. It no longer spoke, its hunger was gone. It had grown old with her, or perhaps it had learned from her to rest. She placed her palm on the stone and closed her eyes. Kassandra, in a soft tone, I kept walking, as you asked. I saw the world you left behind, brother. I carried it through every century, every storm, every silence. The wind answered her. It carried the faint scent of olive and salt, the smell of home. Kassandra holding the eagle in her hand. You would have hated what the gods did with the world. All their myths turned to ash, but mortals. They still dream, Alexios. They still fight for each other. They still love. You were right, that is what keeps the world alive. She smiled faintly, her voice trembling. Kassandra continues. Sometimes I still hear you. When the dawn hits the water just right. When the wind carries laughter that is not there. You are the part of me that learned to let go. Her hand slid over the cracked hearthstone until her fingers touched the small carving at its centre, the mark her mother had once made, a simple spiral of eternity. For the first time in many lifetimes, Kassandra felt peace. She stood, the wind lifting her cloak. The sun had begun to fall again, spilling its old gold across the valley. The hills glowed red with evening, the same colour they had been the day he faded. Kassandra, quietly. Rest well, brother. I will keep watch until the next dawn comes. She turned toward the sea. The Staff of Hermes, now lifeless, lay behind her, its serpents finally still. Kassandra walked until the light swallowed her silhouette. Then she would turn north and continue her path. The world ever changing before her, and she never changing with it. She crossed the lands of the Franks when the old empires began to crumble, and through the mists of the British Isles, where the gods had different names but the same pride. Each step farther from Greece was a step deeper into forgetting, yet she carried Alexios with her in every silence between heartbeats. Sometimes when the wind moved just right, she thought she could still hear his voice in the waves that followed her ship. Alexios's memory, live for me. And she did. The Endless Path. The year was 878 AD when she reached the Isle of Skye, a cold, wind-carved land at the edge of the known world. The sea there was black and deep, and the cliffs rose like the bones of ancient giants. Kassandra had come following whispers, stories of an artifact lost beneath the stone of the northern hills, something that carried the same hum she had felt the day her brother faded. The villagers spoke in riddles and folklore. They told her of visions, of dreams that bled into the waking world, of gods that once walked these shores, and of one name spoken with both fear and reverence. A fisherman would talk of a person, with their voice trembling, "There is a warrior across the waters, eyes like winter lightning." They call themselves Eivor, methinks. Some say they speaks to them gods, they do. I think it's daft if you ask me, but they are a frightening one, I tell ya. The things I hear make me skin tingle and jingle. Some say they even fights them gods. They do. The fisherman would say, wide-eyed, mouth open, clearly missing a few teeth. Kassandra smiled faintly, pulling her cloak tighter against the northern wind. Kassandra, thinking to herself, another soul who cannot rest. She turned her eyes toward the western cliffs, where storm clouds gathered and the sea roared like an old beast. In her hand, the Staff of Hermes pulsed once, faint, almost curious, as if sensing the echo of another power in the world. For the first time in many lifetimes, Kassandra felt something stir within her. Not dread, not weariness, but purpose. Kassandra, quietly, perhaps the world still has a few stories left to tell. The rain began to fall, soft and cold. She looked toward the horizon, where the dark line of a longship cut through the fog, and for a moment, in the thunder's breath, she thought she could hear a voice, distant, steady, fearless, carried through the wind. A voice, strong as the sea, the beginning of something new. And as thunder rolled over the Isle of Skye, the immortal who had walked with gods took her first step toward the mortal who defied them. The air was alive with the scent of rain and sea, and for the first time in centuries, her heart stirred, not with grief, but with the faint tremor of hope. The story of Alexios had ended, his peace sealed beneath the golden horizons of Sparta. But hers and Eivor's had only just begun. Two souls born of storm and shadow, fated to meet where myth bleeds into history, and the fire of the old world burns anew. Thank you for listening to my story of Assassin's Creed, The Last Horizon of an Odyssey. If you want more short stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below what kind of stories you'd like me to write in the future.